Yes, freeze.
Well, if no one among us is capable of governing himself, then who among us has the capacity to govern someone else?
Welcome back to the Liberty Block. This is Elliot Axelman. We have a great guest calling in now. We're very lucky to have the philosopher with us, joining us by phone, to help explain why the licensing cartel is so dangerous to liberty and how badly it distorts the market. She creates videos online, generally on her Facebook, that teach people about voluntarism and self-ownership and the free market, really. Her recent video explaining what is inherently wrong with taxation was reposted a few weeks ago by Being Libertarian's Facebook, and it has since gotten over 1.5 million views. Philosopher, welcome to the Liberty Block.
Hey, Elliot. Glad to talk to you again.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to talk about occupational licensing for the next about half hour. Can you explain to everyone listening what occupational licensing really is?
So occupational licensing is essentially asking the government for permission to work. It's making sure that you're not going to get in trouble for working in a certain field and making sure you have their stamp of approval, their license, before you do anything.
Yeah, so it's pretty sad. According to a study by the Institute for Justice, in the 1950s, only 1 in every 20 people needed an occupational license to work. Now that number is about 1 in 3 people, so 30-some% of people need a license. And this includes not just doctors who need the MD license, not just lawyers, nurses. This includes barbers, manicurists, interior designers, various
hair braiders.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I saw that the other day.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, and every state kind of has their own laws, and it's very, very arbitrary. Some states regulate only certain occupations, and some states regulate others, and they all have extremely big variation in how long it takes to earn a degree. And we're going to get into all those. So the first big issue I really want to address is, let's speak economically. Occupational licenses, first of all, they raise the prices for consumers because they make that person, take the barber, for example. I have a friend who just became a barber, and he was cutting hair before he got his license. Just don't tell anyone. But now he got his license, and now he can legally cut people's hairs. But the fact that he had to pay... What's that?
When he got his license, did he stop hurting people cutting their hair? Like, did he just magically stop?
Well, before he got that New York State license, thanks for asking, before he got that New York State license, every customer he had that he cut their hair absolutely died because it was just so dangerous. But now that he got the license, the government, the New York gave him their stamp of approval. Yep, exactly. That's the thing. It's all about our safety. It's all about the children, right?
Yeah.
So now that he got the license, he has to charge customers more because now he paid more. So that investment of a few $100s for a barber, it's only a few $100s or a little bit of time. He actually had to take a New York State licensing class. He took a class for a few weeks, which is a few $100s and weeks of time, and then he had to pay for the test and the licenses and all that. And now he has to raise the price for all his customers. So his customers are hurt, he's hurt, and we're not that much safer. And we're going to get into that also. There were a lot of studies done. Occupational licenses do not make us safer, and then we're going to bring some proof that it makes people a lot less safe. So I actually have some numbers here on the statistics. According to the Reason Foundation, occupational licenses cost the economy anywhere between $32 to $42 billion a year. That's number one. Another study, and what's really nice is the Obama White House actually did a study on occupational licenses. I still can't believe this, and they came up with numbers that were pretty bad for the occupational licensing industry. Nurse practitioners, NPs, their licensing requirements recently got stricter. That drove up the price of child medical exams by 16%. And dental hygienists, now that they have to be licensed, well, dental hygienists and assistants led to an overall price increase in dental patients of 7 to 11%. So now they have to get more training, they get paid more, they have to charge customers more.
Right. I mean, to add on to that, since you're mentioning nurse practitioners and how the cost of child exams raised, we see that in healthcare now, and we've seen that amongst doctors that the price has increased ever since the American Medical Association was able to lobby the government and regulate the number of doctors that could graduate each year. So when you do that, when you regulate how many doctors can be available in the market, you make it that much more specialized, you decrease competition, and also requiring doctors to attend medical schools, which are very expensive. And before going to medical school, they have the 4-year university that they attend. That also drives up the cost. And as you're just mentioning, whatever occupation, if the licensee has to go through, different classes or schools, they have to pay for all of that. That will eventually be pushed back to the consumer because that occupation is now that much more costly to employ. So yeah, I just want to mention that since healthcare and it being so expensive is a hot topic right now, I just want to mention that part of the reason it's so expensive is because of the artificial limitation on the number of doctors and the high amount of cost it takes to become a doctor.
Yeah, regulation always hurts the economy. That's the way I see it. It can only stand to hurt the economy.
Right, and that's all occupational licensing is. It's just another form of regulation. And if you look at any type of government interference or regulation in the market, you will see a decrease in competition, and thus there isn't an incentive for people to lower their costs since there's not as much competition. That's why, an artificial monopoly is so bad. Because there's no competition, thus no incentive to lower costs and raise quality. That's what you'll see with any sort of government interference, is that costs tend to go up for consumers since competition decreases and quality tends to suffer as well as a result.
Of course. So when I looked into it, all the occupational licensing, and I was wondering what's really driving it. I mean, I know government in general, most politicians in the country love controlling the economy as much as they can, even to a point of communism. But I really looked into it, and what I seemed to find, and let me know if you agree or if I'm way off, what I seemed to find was that the occupations that were already in were lobbying the states, because this varies by state, they were lobbying the state occupational licensing agencies to increase those requirements for licenses so that fewer people can get licenses, and that decreases competition. And like we were saying in the last half hour with Morgan, it's all about competition. Competition is what brings the prices down and the quality up. It's basic economics. We all learn it in first grade, right?
Right. It's we can say basic economics, but to be even more clear, it's base human incentives. If you are someone who has a business and there's no one else competing with you in the market, what incentive do you have to just keep, spending money on research and development to continue improving and creating efficiencies and decreasing costs? You don't have one. But if you have someone else who's competing against you, who's like, hey, I offer higher quality, lower costs, you're going to work and you're going to invest more capital to try and lower your own costs and lower the prices for consumers. So, yeah, that's why competition is so important, and it's just base incentives about humans and what drives humans.
Exactly. Competition it holds the other companies accountable. If there's Apple and there's Samsung who makes Droid, it holds them both accountable, and what do we see? Every year they get better and they get cheaper, or at least stay the same, and they get so much better because they have to one-up each other. And that's the great thing about competition in our economy. That's what made our economy great in the first place. So the next big issue to address is people might say, yeah, but come on, guys, the occupational licensing at least improves the quality of the care. It improves the quality of what these professionals can now give. So that's actually not true. So when consumers can't find a professional to provide a service, like we'll talk about plumbers and a few others, for example, when they can't find a professional, they might want to do it themselves. So we see cases where homeowners may try to do their own electrical work, and because licensed electricians are now so expensive because they had to pay so much money to get their license from the state. So now they're too expensive. Instead of hiring them for a few bucks, you're hiring them for a few $100s an hour, as we know electricians and plumbers are now. And now what happens? If you had me doing electrical work in my house, it wouldn't be a good outcome. It would not be safe. I'd end up in the hospital, right? So Does it improve overall quality of the electrical work that's done in the house because there are higher licensing requirements? No, it decreases the quality because now instead of me being able to afford an electrician, I'm doing it myself, and that's not going to end well. And the same with plumbers. People are doing their own plumbing because they can't afford that plumber that now has to get this license that costs so much more. So, and we see this with various industries. The higher that barrier, the higher the requirement, the more expensive people become, and then people use them less. And now those plumbers and electricians are not getting business either, so it hurts them too.
Right. Yeah. And that's definitely a side effect of raising the price for consumers. What occupational licensing does, but something else is that occupational licensing itself doesn't necessarily raise the quality for consumers because we have to look at what it entails to be to get an occupational license. And from my understanding, this probably varies, but I think it entails answering a lot of questions on a test. Is that right? Have you looked into that?
How to get the license? Yeah, they have various requirements. Mm-hmm. Actually, in New York State, if you want to there are two things. I think one was farrier and one was maybe groom. They deal with horses. I know nothing about them, to be honest. But you actually need degrees for some of this stuff. For interior design, and most states, they regulate, you need a license to be an interior designer. Do not ask me why. I have no idea. If you want to design my home, you don't need a license. But you actually need degrees. I think in New York you need a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree, and then you can apply for the license, and then you pay money, and then you take a test. So some licenses are simple. Wow. Some are a few dollars and you take a test. Some are a few dollars and you don't need a test. Some you really need a degree. It's like MD. Some of them are really difficult to get.
Right. And what we know so if that's true, at least when we're talking about licenses that either require a degree, which getting a degree in itself involves a lot of tests. There's not much hands-on experience. It's really just, rote memorization, basically what we all experience in public school, taking tests and stuff like that. And beyond getting a degree, you might have to just take a test itself to get the license. And there's no hands-on experience, and it's not watching you for 3 months kind of thing. It's just, here, take this test, can you answer the question, and then you get the license. And if we're talking about that kind of license, that doesn't necessarily improve quality for the individual. The individual, what really shows if someone's good at what they do, if whether they're a plumber, electrician, hair braider, what really shows that they're good at their job is their customers that come back. And that's why you mentioned Yelp earlier, is that websites like Yelp, Google reviews, even Facebook now, BBB, these are all places where customers, people who have actually experienced, being a client, can leave their reviews. And that's how they build rapport, and that's one way that they can show their experience and their competence. Taking a license, taking a test for a license doesn't necessarily say that you can do your job. And personally, for me, I've worked as a waitress before, and one of the things you have to get, this is in Washington State, you had to get a food handler's permit, food and drink handling permit, and in order to get the job. And I had many fellow waitresses and coworkers that did not follow the rules. They memorized everything they needed for the test. They're like, okay, I gotta, make sure I wear gloves when I'm handling raw meat, or I need to make sure my hair is tied up or whatever. But when it comes to finally getting the job, you'll see them cut corners here and there and not really, not wash their hands when no one's watching and stuff like that. So that's an example of where licensing doesn't suddenly just make that individual really competent at their job. All it means is that they're good, they're able to pass the test. And we can see this similar effect when it comes to someone getting a 4-year degree. For example, in computer science, I'm a programmer, and just because you get a degree doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll be chosen for a position especially if your competition for a job is someone who doesn't have a degree but has shown that they're able to develop and have been developing enterprise software for like 4 years.
Exactly. I see that across so many different industries. It's more about what your abilities are more than the degree. Welcome back to the Liberty Block. I'm Elliot Axelman. On the phone with us, we have the philosopher. She's kind of a Facebook celebrity. She is, if you ask me anyway. And we're speaking about occupational licensing. So you mentioned, you kind of asked me how long it takes for various occupations to get their licenses. Something I wanted to mention, in every state, it takes a lot longer to become licensed as an athletic trainer than to be an EMT, an emergency medical technician who works on an ambulance, who operates a...
Wow.
Yep, they operate a big, heavy, fast, dangerous vehicle. They go through red lights, and they do basic level patient care, and they do have people's lives in their hands. And so in Michigan...
It illustrates how arbitrary it is.
Yep, in Michigan, it actually takes 1,460 days of education in order to get licensed to be an athletic trainer, whereas it's only 26 days to get an EMT license.
Yeah, that's silly.
It is unbelievable. The average in the country for EMTs is 33 days, and the average for interior designers is still 2,190 days.
Oh, my goodness.
But, get this, only 4 states require a license for our interior designers. So that's another interesting thing, and like I mentioned earlier, the requirements across the states are pretty arbitrary. So like you asked me, that friend who used to cut my hair, and I liked it because I'd go right over to his house, he'd cut my hair, it's pretty cheap, and it was easy, and it was quick, and none of us lost money to taxes, so I liked it, even though I guess I'm a criminal now. But what's interesting is that you asked me if I died, if it was dangerous before he had that license. Did the license really declare that he was appropriate and safe? And I know people argue with me. They argue with me about this, about barbers. Well, you see, they have razors and they have various tools and they can hurt people. They have to learn the BBP, the bloodborne pathogen stuff, because they deal with blood or pathogens. They have to learn how to clean their instruments. But you also mentioned something like Yelp. So you were saying there's actually a website where we can figure out which professionals and which companies are better or worse?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I was being, obviously, I'm sure you caught on that I was being very facetious when I joked about that. But basically, passing a test doesn't suddenly change the individual skills and competency and their adherence to certain practices, hygienic practices. So that's what I was commenting on, to really just show that it doesn't do that.
Yeah, so if only 4 states regulate one occupation, like take interior design, for instance, and there are a lot of these that only half the states, so if 25 states regulate it and require a license and 25 states don't, either 25 of the states are stupid or reckless or dangerous because they're not licensing something that's potentially a dangerous occupation to be in, or the states that do regulate it, like the 4 that regulate interior design, they're just unnecessarily regulating us and over-regulating us into submission. So I think these states need to all just kind of, I hate to say all the states need to get on the same page, but I really think that most of these are pretty unnecessary, evidenced by the fact that in the other 46 states, I don't think the interior designers lead to any danger or any negative outcomes. I wouldn't even see how that could happen.
Right. I mean, I don't know, one could argue, well, we need interior licensing because, if you don't, you're going to have someone mismatch the colors.
Oh, no. That's too dangerous. We can't have that.
And a consumer can't choose or see samples of the person's work. No, we need to make sure they have a license, yes.
So I'm curious, what do people say to you when you mention Yelp and you say, now that Yelp has been invented, whatever, 10, 15 years ago, why do we need licensing? Because I use Yelp so often. Apparently 180 million people use it every month. So pretty much, I mean, a good part of the world uses it, and the others use Google Maps and the reviews on the Google Maps right there. I use that a lot also. I'll look for a restaurant to go out with my girlfriend to, and I'll go to the Google Maps, and I see 5 stars and a lot of good reviews, good service, good food. I go there. So,
well, what I say is, I mean, that doesn't really come up for me. It's not that Yelp has suddenly made it so that occupational licensing is no longer needed. It's never been needed. Before government-mandated licenses, things were working just fine. Before the internet, people would tend to choose different businesses and services based on word of mouth. So you'd ask your friend, like, hey, do you know a good barber? You know, and your friend would probably say, yeah, I've been returning to Joe Schmo for 20 years. He does my hair great. He, you know, he's never cut me. He has hands like Edward Scissorhands, you know. And so it's not that the internet has made it so that occupational licensing is obsolete. It's just made it easier for people to review lots of different businesses and has only opened up the ability to see a wide array of choices. But, you know, back then things got around by word of mouth. People put up flyers. You know, there was ways to communicate with people before the internet. So occupational licensing was never needed. And it's always, you know, these principles that we're talking about occupational licensing, raising costs, decreasing competition, they apply regardless of the communication mediums that are available in the world today.
Yeah, I really think that occupational licensing throughout, I mean, almost every occupation, I really think it's unnecessary. Mm-hmm. I actually read an article someone posted on Facebook. There's a town in Alabama, I believe, that this was just happening today, I guess. They were forcing the teenagers, you know how teenagers in the summer might mow some lawns to make some extra money to save up for whatever they want to save for. Apparently the town in Alabama, some people complained, the landscapers, I guess, people who really did it for a living complained that they were taking their business and they wanted to force them, and the town did force them, in fact, to get business licenses, to become a business. If a teenager wants to mow a lawn, now he has to pay whatever $100 to become an official business.
Well, this is what you were mentioning earlier, and I didn't get around to asking it, so I'm glad you brought it up again, is you asked if, in my experience, if I've seen that people who are already in the occupation, like, you know, plumbers who are already in the profession, they already have their license, if I've read them lobbying the government or the state legislature to pass laws to make acquiring a license that much harder. And yeah, definitely I have, and you just brought up an example of that. You know, this is what happens when you have a tool called the government, and the government is nothing but a tool of coercion. It is a monopoly on force. And when you have that tool available, again, that just goes back to human incentives. You're going to get people who are who want to protect how much they make. You know, they want to continue having a stable income. You know, humans are naturally adverse to change. We just kind of want things to stay the same and stay stable, afraid of competition and challenge. You know, some people. And, yeah, so when you have this tool called government available that you can lobby and increase, you know, the barriers to entry, it's, unless you have, you know, an economic conscience or whatever, like I doubt you would do that, or I would, you know, it'd be very attractive for you to want to lobby and decrease competition that way. So, yeah, we see that all the time when, you know, companies file for patents, for example. They invent, you know, a new technology or a new device, and they file for a patent with the government. Yeah,
exactly.
That's
sorry to cut you off. We're actually up against a really hard break. We're up against the end of the show. I'm going to have you back sometime soon. We have a lot more to talk about. Philosopher, thank you so much for coming on the show. And we'll have to...
Yes, freeze.